Thank you, Jessica. This is Roger again, and I'm going to introduce the outstanding health, safety, and health stories of 2016. With all these injuries, illnesses, and fatalities that could be prevented, there are a number of journalists and news organizations who are looking very hard at how workers are getting hurt and killed on their jobs, and that's what we're going to recognize today. And let me just remind those of you who are not speaking, if you could mute your microphone, it would be helpful. The selected entries that we're recognizing today in the film category: A Day's Work, which was released in 2015 and produced by David Garcia and Dave Desario. It's a film about the death of a temporary worker, Lawrence Laquan Day Davis in Florida, and the impact of the temp industry on workers' health and safety. In print, internet, and broadcast, and I'm listing these next 6 stories in the order in which they were published, but recognizing all 6 equally as extraordinary contributions to the understanding of health and safety. The first is from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. It's called Gasping for Action by Raquel Rutledge. It's about the dangers of diacetyl and flavorings that are used in coffee and popcorn and other food products. The second, and there's a slide on hazards of the harvest, is from the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, Tragic Harvest by Jeffrey Mitroid. I hope I'm saying his name right, and that is about fatalities on small family farms and the hazards faced in the agricultural industry. The next is from National Public Radio and ProPublica, Joint Investigation Inside Corporate America's Campaign to Ditch Workers' Comp. It's by Howard Burkers and Michael Grable, and it's about a plan, or we might say a scheme in Oklahoma, to privatize workers' comp, to have systems that are administered by employers rather than the public, and the lack of oversight and lower benefits that are associated with that. The next story we're recognizing from the Center for Public Integrity did the reporting, and it was co-published with Slate.com. Common Solvent Keeps Killing Workers and Consumers. That's by Jamie Smith Hopkins. And it's about methylene chloride, which is a very common ingredient in paint strippers. It's very hazardous to people in the refinishing industry, particularly working in bathrooms and other confined spaces. And you'll also find it on the shelf, strippers with that ingredient in any hardware store you go into. So it's a hazard to consumers as well. The next story we're recognizing from the New York Times: Safety Lapses and Deaths Amid a Building Boom in New York. That's by David Chen. And that story details how while construction is going up, the number of injuries and fatalities are going up much, much higher in New York, and many of the workers at risk are immigrant workers, undocumented. English may not be their first language, and they're not getting the training materials they need to work safely on the job. And then the 6th story we're recognizing, again, these are not in rank order, just in the order in which they were published, is from McClatchy Newspapers. It's called Irradiated: The Hidden Legacy of 70 Years of Atomic Weaponry. Reports of more than 33,000 former nuclear workers. These are the people who built the weapons for America's Cold War defense, and more than 33,000 of them died after receiving compensation for their injuries on the job. Rob Hotakainen, Lindsay Wise, Frank Matt, and Samantha Ellinger were lead writers on McClatchy Newspapers, and there was a large team there. In the report itself, there's many other contributors to all these stories. They're identified. Let me just say a word before we go on to our other speakers about how we selected these stories. This was based on an extensive review by the National COSH team of consultants and staff and our volunteer board of directors who represent local COSH groups around the country. We do, as some of you may know, a social media news feed 3 and more times a week, and we keep very close track of stories and news about health and safety, and these are really the extraordinary ones that stood out. I would identify 3 criteria in selecting the stories. One was really in-depth investigations. These are not stories that are done in a day or two, but really require weeks and months of investigation. The second is that these are trend stories that identify not something that happened to a single worker or family, but that's happening to many, many workers and families as a result of on-the-job exposures and events. And the third is that these stories all made excellent use of internet capabilities and multimedia. You see photos and graphics and video, and several of them linked to databases where you can actually dig into, in some cases, thousands or hundreds of cases of fatalities and find out more about those individuals. So we know it's a challenging time for the news industry, and we really want to recognize and celebrate those journalists and news organizations that have taken the time and devoted the resources to examining and illustrating the safety issues on the job and how workers are getting hurt and killed. Congratulations to all of those withers.